Chapter 1. The Cracked Teacup. The village of Hoshimura was the kind of place that felt like it had been gently folded into the earth, tucked between the wide, gold-brushed rice fields and low green hills that breathed mist in the early mornings. It was quiet, but not silent. There was the rhythmic croaking of frogs, the distant call of a hawk drifting on the wind, and the steady hum of cicadas that never quite went away, even after summer had passed. The fields themselves whispered with memory, each stalk of rice swaying like an old storyteller, reluctant to forget. The houses in Hoshimura were small, wooden, and soft with age, with sliding paper doors and roofs thick with moss. Vines crept up stone walls and rain gutters, and stray cats lazed like old spirits in patches of sun. People here still mended things instead of throwing them away. Cracked teacups were glued with gold, bicycles patched with cloth and twine. Everyone walked slower. Everyone bowed to the mountains. It was in this village, on the edge of the largest rice field, that two children lived in a house that smelled of lavender, soy sauce, and the occasional wood smoke. Tobo was 11 years old and had a mind like a knot, tight, looping, impossible to follow unless you already knew where it began. He was quiet in the way deep wells are quiet, always watching, always thinking, and never quite saying what he meant. His eyes were dark and clever, with a crease of seriousness that didn't belong to a child. His hands were always dirty, not from carelessness, but from curiosity. He liked to dig for beetles, for old coins, for the way things fit together underground. His sister Neri was 8 and nothing like him. She was loud, bright, and walked like she meant to stomp a new path wherever she went. Her hair was always tangled with flower petals, and she kept her treasures in a red tin box: feathers, buttons, a doll's eye, and a single perfect shell. Neri laughed too loudly, asked too many questions, and cried for the smallest kindness. They lived with their grandmother Oba, who had knees like tree roots and a voice that still sang old songs when she stirred the miso soup. Oba didn't say much, but she always knew when it was going to rain. She talked to the rice plants. She listened to the wind. People said she was a little strange, but in the kind of way that made you want to bring her pickled plums in exchange for a story. The summer that changed everything began the day Tomo found the crack in the field. It wasn't large, just a thin line in the mud near the irrigation canal, barely wide enough to fit his pinky finger in. But something about it was wrong. The rice plants near the crack were pale, almost silver. The earth there felt warm, even though the sun hadn't touched it for hours. When Tomo pressed his ear to the ground, he could hear something, not a voice, not exactly, more like a humming, more like breathing. That night he couldn't sleep. The next morning, Nari saw it too. "It looks like the earth is trying to open its mouth," she said, crouching next to it. "Do you think it's hungry?" Tomo didn't answer. He couldn't stop thinking about the sound. It was still in his ears, like a tune he couldn't forget. Later that day they brought Oba to see it. She bent over slowly, her bones creaking like old bamboo, and touched the edge of the crack with the tip of her cane. She said, eyes narrowing. "The field is dreaming again." "The field is what?" Nari asked, frowning. Abba didn't answer. She just stood there for a long time, listening to something neither of them could hear. Then she whispered, so soft that only Tomo caught it, "It's too early this time." That night the dream came. Tomo stood in the rice field, but everything was wrong. The stalks were too tall, reaching above his head, swaying like trees. The sky was green, the air buzzed with whispers, and then, rising from the cracked earth like a shadow given shape, came a creature. It was small, barely bigger than a loaf of bread. It had brown fur, twitching whiskers, and eyes like polished black stones. A shrew, but not an ordinary one. This shrew wore a tiny vest stitched from leaf fiber and fastened with a red berry button. Its paws were stained with dirt, and it walked with the slow, solemn steps of something very old. "You've heard it, haven't you?" it asked, in a voice like wind through roots. Tomo couldn't speak. "The earth stirs. The bound root is loosening." The shrew looked up at him, unblinking. "And you've been chosen to listen." Tomo woke up in a cold sweat, heart thudding like a taiko drum. Outside, the cicadas had gone silent. The air was thick, and when he looked out the window, he saw that the crack in the field had grown. Chapter 2. The murmuring beneath the crack in the field widened overnight. By morning, it had stretched nearly the length of a tatami mat, jagged and dark, like something had clawed its way up from deep underground. The silver-tinged rice around it had withered at the tips, curling like burnt paper, though the rest of the field remained vibrant and green. The air above the crack shimmered slightly, as if it were always on the verge of rain, even under the full morning sun. Oba didn't say much over breakfast. She stared into her tea for a long time, and when she finally did speak, her voice was low. "It's starting again." Neri was still half asleep, swinging her legs under the table and eating pickled radish with gusto. "What's starting again?" Oba didn't answer. She stood, fetched a box from the shelf above the stove, and set it down in front of them. It was a wooden chest, lacquered and worn smooth by decades of use. Tomo had seen it before, but Oba never opened it. "Your grandfather carved this," she said quietly. "New things about the land, things most people forgot. Hoshimura isn't like other villages." She opened the lid. Inside was a faded map, a bundle of dried herbs, a compass whose needle spun slowly in circles, and a black stone the size of a plum, etched with a spiral. "The bound root lies beneath our fields," she said. "It keeps the earth still, keeps the old magic asleep. But the seal..." She glanced at Tomo, her expression unreadable. "The seal is cracking." Nari leaned over the table. "So the earth is waking up?" "No," Oba said. "Something beneath it is." That afternoon, Tobo returned to the crack alone. The wind had changed. It smelled less like rice and soil and more like something damp and unfamiliar, like the underside of stones or the hollow of a forgotten cave. When he crouched near the crack again, the humming returned, stronger this time, like a distant chant buried in the mud. He didn't realize he was being watched. A rustle came from the field, and from the waving stalks stepped the shrew. In the daylight, it looked less dreamlike, more real, though no less strange. Its fur gleamed with a sheen of moisture, and its tiny vest was now fastened with a pale green button that glowed faintly. "You came," the shrew said. "Good. The soil remembers your footsteps." Tomo didn't know how to respond. "Who are you?" The shrew gave a slight bow. "I am Kuro, keeper of the deep path. I tend the roots that bind the earth's memory, and I need your help." Tomo's throat was dry. "Why me?" "Because you listened," Kuro said simply, "and because the fields have chosen." Before Tomo could ask anything more, Kuro scurried to the edge of the crack and touched it with his paw. A faint tremor passed through the earth. The shimmer over the crack thickened, and for a moment the world around them flickered, like the rice field had blinked. And then Tomo was no longer in the field. He stood in a great underground cavern, lit by veins of glowing roots that pulsed like breathing light. The air was heavy with the scent of soil and stone. Towering stalks of crystal-clear wheat swayed without wind, and beneath his feet the ground was soft as moss. "This is the Underfield," Kuro said, appearing beside him, "a memory of the land. It exists beneath every step you take in the waking world." Tomo's eyes widened. "Is this magic?" "Magic is just memory that's too old to die," Kuro replied. "And this place remembers everything." A low groan echoed through the cavern. The ground trembled. Kuro's ears twitched. "The boundroot sleeps here, but something is disturbing it, pulling at the weave. If the root is unbound, the magic will rise uncontrolled. Not all of it is gentle." Tomu turned toward the sound. In the far distance, where the roots grew thickest, he saw a flicker of movement, like something large was stirring just beneath the surface. Then the cavern shook violently, and everything faded to white. He woke up lying in the mud, the crack beside him, the hum louder than ever. That night, Nari insisted on going with him. "You're not sneaking off without me again," she said, holding her red tin box like a shield. "I have important things in here. I might need to trade them with a ghost." "There aren't ghosts," Tomo muttered. "Are so," she said. Alba said, "The fields remember." Together they crept through the darkness toward the crack. Moonlight silvered the rice stalks, and the stars were so bright they felt close enough to pluck. The wind had fallen silent, and the night was thick with the kind of stillness that made your skin prickle. Kuro was waiting. He bowed to Nari with a gravity that made her blink in surprise. "Ah, the keeper of the red tin. I suspected we would meet." "Hi," Neri said uncertainly. "Are you always this polite?" "Only to those who carry lost things." With Kuro leading them, they returned to the crack, and again the shimmer thickened. This time, both children were drawn into the Underfield, but something had changed. Where before the roots had glowed softly, now they flickered with a sickly light. Dark veins pulsed between them, and the cavern ceiling wept with falling droplets of tar. Something was poisoning the memory of the earth. At the heart of it all, a massive shape shifted, coiled around the deepest root. It was not fully visible, but its form writhed like smoke underwater, and from its core radiated a deep, pulsing sound, half growl, half whisper. "The root worm," Kuro said grimly, "an old hunger. It feeds on broken memory, lost soil, the forgotten promises of land and people. Someone has stirred it, something above ground." Tomo looked at Nari. She clutched his hand tightly. "How do we stop it?" he asked. Kuro's eyes gleamed. We must remember what was lost. We must restore the seals, but we cannot do it alone. Suddenly, a new voice spoke from behind them, a warm, tired, and very human voice. Then, it's a good thing you're not alone. Oba stood at the edge of the cavern, her cane sinking slightly into the soft earth, her eyes sharper than they'd been in years. I knew it would wake again, she said, stepping forward, and I've been waiting. Chapter 3. The Box That Remembers. The underfield groaned as if in pain. Roots flickered with uneasy light, and the dark veins crawling along the cavern walls pulsed faster, as though drawn to Oba's presence. The rootworm, that great shadow curled beneath the bound root, seemed to recoil from her, but only slightly. It knew her, and it remembered. I walked these tunnels long before either of you were born, Oba said, stepping toward the pulsing core. Before I was Oba, before I stopped listening to the earth. Her voice cracked like dry twigs. She raised her hand, and the roots around her responded, glowing softly, trembling like dogs recognizing a long-lost master. Tomo stared at her, heart thudding. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? Because you were children, she said simply, and I was afraid. I thought if I left it buried, the land would forget, that I could forget. But it didn't forget, said Kuro, his tiny voice filled with something like respect. The land never forgets. Only people do. Nari had been quiet until now. She was standing very still, her hands clutching the red tin box so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tomo turned to her. Are you okay? She didn't answer. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, with something else. Wonder? Recognition? And then, softly, it's calling to me. The others turned. What do you mean? Oba asked. The root? The big one? The one under everything. Nari stepped forward. I can feel it humming, not like when we were here before. It's louder now, like it knows me. Oba inhaled sharply. Nari, she said slowly, what do you keep in that box of yours? Nari looked down at the red tin in her hands. It's just my things, she mumbled. You know, important stuff from places. Can I see it? Oba asked. Nari hesitated. Then, wordlessly, she knelt and set the box down. She opened it. Inside were the usual oddities. A blue glass marble, a pigeon feather, a cracked button shaped like a flower. But underneath those, wrapped in a scrap of faded cloth, was something none of them had seen before. A seed, small, smooth, black as night, and glowing faintly. Oba knelt beside her granddaughter, and her breath caught. Oh, spirits, she whispered. You've kept it all this time. Tomo frowned. What is it? Oba looked up, her eyes suddenly wet. It's an earth core seed, one of the last. I gave it to your mother when she was a child, before she left the village. She said she'd keep it safe, and I suppose she gave it to Nari. I just found it one day in the old bookshelf, Nari said. Didn't know what it was, but it felt warm, so I kept it. That's okay, right? Kuro took a step forward, peering at the seed. More than okay. That seed is sacred. Earth core seeds were given by the spirit of the mountain itself. They carry a memory older than memory. Oba nodded, and they can restore what has been unraveled. If they bloom, "But this one hasn't bloomed," said Tomo. "Because it hasn't heard the right voice," said Kuro, his dark eyes locking on Nari. "Until now." Nari blinked. "Me? You carry the wild memory," said the shrew, "not like your brother who listens with silence. You carry chaos and joy and grief in one breath. That's what the earth needs to grow again." The ground trembled violently. The rootworm growled low, the sound like the grinding of mountains. Kuro's ears flattened. "We have little time. The seal is nearly undone." Oba stood, placing a hand on Nari's shoulder. "We'll go to the hollow tree," she said. "That's where the seal was bound. It's the only place the seed can take root." "The one at the edge of the northern fields?" Tomo asked. Oba nodded. "That tree is hollow because we bound the spirit inside it," she said. "A spirit of soil and decay. It keeps the rootworm contained. If the binding fails, that spirit will awaken and it will no longer be kind." The shimmering around them pulsed. The cavern was collapsing. Kuro darted forward. "Hold on to each other," and with a flash of green light, they were back in the field. Just before dawn, the rice stalks rippled gently in the wind, but the crack in the earth had widened even further. It now spread like a jagged claw print across the southern edge of the field, and the air hummed with pressure. Tomo looked at Nari, whose eyes were still glowing faintly. She looked older somehow, not in body, but in gaze, as if the seed had awakened something inside her. They had until sunset. Chapter 4: The Tree That Weeps. The hollow tree stood on the northern edge of the village, where the rice fields met the whispering woods. It was ancient, so old in fact that no one remembered when it had stopped growing. Its bark was pale and cracked, like old bone, and a hollow gaped in its side wide enough for a child to crawl through. Most villagers avoided it. They said it was cursed, or at least unlucky. Oba, however, walked toward it with steady steps. The air here was different, thicker, heavy with the scent of moss, ash, and something else, something like forgotten tears. Tomu and Nari followed in silence, Kuro padding alongside them. The earth core seed pulsed in Nari's pocket, warm and restless, like a heartbeat against her palm. "Will it hurt?" she asked quietly. Kuro looked up at her. "Growth always does." Oba stopped in front of the tree and pressed her palm to the bark. It groaned softly beneath her touch, as if waking from a very long sleep. "The seal lies inside," she said, "twisted into the roots. We must go in." Nari looked at the hollow, then at Tomo. He gave her a nod, his face pale but determined. The four of them stepped into the tree. It was not what they expected. Inside, the space opened into a spiral chamber of gnarled roots and flickering light. The air shimmered with floating specks, like fireflies made of dust. The roots wound downward like a staircase, drawing them deep into the earth, and at the center of it all was the seal. It wasn't a lock or a door, it was a being. Curled in the cradle of roots was a creature made of soil and bark and bone. It had a face like an old tree trunk, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if breathing in dreams. From its chest extended dozens of fine root-like tendrils pulsing gently, connected to the ceiling, the floor, the very walls. "The spirit of soil," whispered Kuro. "It's what binds the rootworm below, but the threads are fraying." Oba stepped forward. I was one of 4 who wove this seal. 3 have passed. I am the last. The spirit stirred at her voice. Its eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils like rings in wood. You've returned, it said in a voice like shifting earth. Old root, old name. Oba bowed her head. I come to rebind the seal, but I am no longer strong enough alone. The spirit looked past her to Nari. The child holds the seed, it murmured. The child carries memory. Oba turned to her granddaughter. Nari, it's your choice now. Nari swallowed. Her hand went to the tin box. But what if I do it wrong? You won't, Oba said, because the earth listens to your heart. The spirit extended one hand, if it could be called that, a tendril of root and soil, gnarled and trembling. Nari stepped forward. She placed the seed in its outstretched root. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber shook. The tendrils connecting the spirit to the walls writhed like worms. The earth groaned, and the rootworm's voice, deep, furious, terrible, rose from below. Mine! The spirit's body convulsed. Roots snapped. The glow from the earth core seed surged into blinding light, and a crack split the ground beneath them. The rootworm was coming, and the seal, it was breaking. Toma was the first to move. He grabbed Neri, pulling her back, but the spirit's roots lashed out, not in anger, but in desperation. One must stay, it said, to tend the seed, to become the root. Everyone froze. Oba stepped forward. Then take me. But the spirit shook its head. You are old, brittle. You will not hold. I am the last binder, Oba said. Let me finish what I began. And she stepped into the root circle. The spirit hesitated. Then slowly, gently, it wrapped its roots around her. Tomo shouted, "No! Oba, you can't!" But she turned and smiled. You'll take care of the fields, won't you? And then she was gone. The roots consumed her in light. The chamber trembled. The seed bloomed. It burst into a glowing flower, sending tendrils of golden energy spiraling into the walls, the roots, the very bones of the hollow tree. The seal held. The rootworm's scream was cut off mid-roar. Silence fell. Kuro knelt. The spirit sleeps once more. Tomo collapsed to his knees. Nari stood frozen, eyes wide, tears falling silently down her cheek. They had saved the village, but Oba was gone. Chapter 5. Where the field meets the sky. The days that followed were quiet. The villagers never knew the full truth of what had happened beneath the fields, nor of the great rootworm whose hunger had nearly torn the earth open. They simply said the soil had changed, that the rice grew stronger, brighter, as if the fields themselves had taken a long, deep breath. But in the house at the edge of the southern field, 2 children woke to a world that would never be quite the same. Tomo sat on the porch steps, his chin resting on his knees, staring out across the gently waving stalks. The sunrise painted the paddies in hues of orange and rose, and a thin mist curled above the water like forgotten dreams. Behind him, the house was still. Oba's sandals remained neatly by the door, as if she might step into them at any moment. Her teacup sat on the table, the last tea she made long since cold. Her garden still bloomed, but she was not there. not in the way she had been. Nari emerged from inside and sat beside her brother. She was quieter now, not sad exactly, but full, like her heart had grown too wide for her chest. "She's part of it now," she said after a long silence. "The roots, the earth, I can feel her when I walk barefoot in the field." Tomo nodded. He had no reason to doubt it. Nari had changed. There was a steadiness to her now. She still laughed, still stomped and asked questions, but her gaze carried the weight of something older, something rooted, and she no longer carried the red tin box. It now sat on Oba's old shelf, beside a small wooden carving of a shrew. Kuro had returned to the underfield after the sealing, but before he left, he pressed a soft stone into Nari's hand. "A gift," he said, "from the soil itself. It will bloom if you ever need to speak with me," he had told her. "But I think you'll be fine without me for a while." In the weeks that followed, the children tended Oba's garden together. Tomo learned how to recognize the different stages of growth in the rice by feel alone. Nari learned the names of every herb Oba had planted, some of which didn't exist in any book, and began brewing tea that made the neighbors smile without knowing why. One afternoon, as they finished tying bundles of young rice shoots, Tomo looked up suddenly. "Do you think we'll forget her?" Nari shook her head. "No," she said, "because the field won't." And that night, when the fireflies returned to the ditches and the frogs sang in chorus, the children dreamed. Not of shadows or seals, but of Oba sitting beneath the hollow tree, humming softly, her cane resting beside her, the earth blooming with golden flowers beneath her feet. The hollow tree, too, had changed. A week after the sealing, villagers walking the northern ridge found it blooming for the first time in living memory. Pale blossoms, shaped like tiny stars, unfurled along its twisted branches. Birds nested in its hollows. The roots no longer groaned. They sighed. When Tomo and Nari visited, they found the bark warm to the touch. "She's still watching," Nari said. At the tree's base, new green shoots spiraled outward in a perfect ring, like a seal being rewritten in slow, patient life. Later that summer, the village held a festival. It wasn't for Oba, not officially, but the children knew. Lanterns were hung in the trees, and candles floated down the irrigation canals like tiny boats made of flame and paper. Families cooked late into the evening, laughter filling the air like smoke, and the stars blinked down over Hoshimura with sleepy delight. Nari wore a yukata with vines stitched along the hem. Tomo wore one with small pine needles embroidered at the collar. They stood beneath the wind chimes strung across the festival path, and for the first time in weeks, they laughed with their mouths wide open. At the center of the festival, the elders opened the old story book, the one kept sealed in the shrine, and read aloud the tales of Hoshimura's founding, the agreements with the mountain, the whispering spirit in the reeds. This time, when the part about the hollow tree was read, the story ended differently. And it is said that when the hollow tree blooms again, the bond between land and people has been renewed. It is a promise, a quiet one, that we are still listening. Nari closed her eyes. She could feel the earth humming gently beneath her feet, like a lullaby with no words. Later that night, as the last fireworks bloomed overhead, "Should have liked tonight," Tomo said softly. She did. Nari replied. She was here. They stood in silence, and then, just as the last spark fell, a soft rustling came from the far end of the rice field. A tiny creature stepped out from between the stalks. Kuro. His fur was damp with dew, and he wore a new vest, this one woven with silk threads and bits of polished grain. He nodded solemnly. "Good festival," he said. Tomo blinked. "I thought you were back underground." "I was," Kuro replied, "but she told me to visit." "She?" Nari asked, breath catching. Kuro gave a small smile. "She says, thank you for keeping the fields warm, for listening." Then, with a tip of his tiny hat, he vanished once more. The years passed like soft wind across the paddies. Tomu and Nari grew, as all children do, though the fields seemed reluctant to let them go. Each season stitched new layers of memory into the soil. Spring brought the scent of wet grass and plum blossoms. Summer was heavy with dragonflies and long golden twilights. Autumn swept in with the rustle of drying stalks and the smoke of cooking fires, and winter hushed the village beneath a blanket of slow, thoughtful snow. Tomo, now taller and quieter than ever, became the keeper of the southern fields. People said he had hands that understood the soil, that his rice grew straighter and sweeter than any other. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, people listened. Sometimes, if the evening was warm, he would pause in his work and press his palm to the ground, not out of habit, but as a kind of greeting, as if asking the land how it was doing that day. And the earth always answered. Nari, meanwhile, found her place among the herbs and wild plants. She turned Oba's old garden into something more, a place where sick neighbors came to sip tea, where children with bad dreams were given bundles of lavender and thistle. She kept the stories alive, too, the ones Oba used to tell, and the ones the earth whispered only to her. She still carried strange things in her pockets. Stones that buzzed in her palm, leaves with spiral veins, and once a beetle that glowed with tiny blue lights, which she released only after giving it a name. She visited the hollow tree every season. Sometimes she sat and read aloud. Other times she just listened. The blossoms still bloomed there, not every year, but often enough to remind her that the seal held, that Oba was watching, that the world was still gently, quietly turning beneath her feet. One early spring morning, when the frost had just melted and the first shoots were rising from the fields, Nari walked barefoot through the southern paddies. The mud was soft and cool between her toes, and the water shimmered with the promise of green things. As she stood there, eyes closed, she heard it again, the hum. But this time it wasn't a warning. It was a song, low and ancient, woven from roots and wind and forgotten lullabies. It spoke of deep sleep and deep memory, of growing and holding, of things that change and things that stay. She smiled. From the far ridge, Tomo waved. He had been watching, as always. "You hear it again?" he called. "Yes," Nari shouted back, "and it's happy." That evening, just as the sky began to turn the color of ripe persimmons, a group of children came running down the path from the village. Their hair was full of leaves. One of them carried a frog. Another had a kite shaped like a fish. "Tell us a story," they cried. "A real one about the hollow tree?" Nari sat on the porch steps and let them gather around her like sparrows. "Well," she said, brushing dirt from her skirt, "there was once a girl who carried a red tin box." As she spoke, the wind picked up, stirring the chimes above her head. Fireflies blinked lazily in the gathering dusk, and down by the edge of the field, hidden between the stalks, a small figure watched, fur damp with dew, eyes gleaming like polished stones. Kuro smiled, and then he vanished, back to the soil, back to the memory, back to the hum beneath the world. Epilogue: A Teacup in Bloom. In Oba's house, on a shelf above the stove, there sat an old cracked teacup. No one used it anymore. The gold that held its pieces together shimmered softly in the light, and one day in early summer, something small sprouted from within it. A shoot, green and delicate, a single rice plant growing quietly in a cup of broken earth and memory. And it was perfect.